When a man begins to awaken, he finds himself drifting from the crowd. Not in bitterness, not in pride, but simply because the rhythm that once seemed natural no longer speaks to him. Most conversations he encounters revolve around gossip, complaints, or the endless pursuit of status, and suddenly these exchanges feel hollow. What once seemed like connection now appears as performance, each word crafted to maintain appearances, to secure belonging, to affirm identity in the eyes of others. And so, without fanfare, he begins to step back. He is not rejecting the world, nor condemning those still immersed in its patterns. He simply sees through them. And once the illusion is revealed, it is impossible to pretend with conviction. This quiet stepping back is not isolation, but the beginning of solitude, a space opening between who he once was and who he is becoming. Others may still wave, may still invite him into small talk, but he feels the absence of depth, the absence of truth. He realizes that most bonds were never grounded in honesty, but in habit, in shared illusions, in the comfort of familiar noise. This realization is unsettling at first. He notices how people fill silence with words, not to communicate, but to escape the discomfort of quiet. He sees the constant dance of validation, the nods, the reassurances, the need for agreement. And once he no longer requires these things himself, he becomes aware of how dependent others are upon them. He sees relationships maintained not through truth, but through mutual agreement to keep the story going, a collective performance where everyone agrees to avoid the nakedness of reality. He listens, he cares, but he no longer plays along. And so, a natural distance arises. From the outside, little appears to change. He is still polite, still present, still visible in familiar places. But the energy is different. Those around him sense it, though they cannot name it. He is no longer chasing approval, no longer seeking to be understood, no longer bound to the social game. Some admire this. Others find it disquieting. For when one stops performing, he becomes unpredictable. Without the signals of flattery, competition, or easy reassurance, people cannot place him within the roles they have prepared. He seems distant, quiet, transformed. But what has shifted is not his humanity, it is his freedom. And yet, his freedom does not unfold in a vacuum. It collides with the pressures of the modern world, a society where identity is increasingly tethered to performance. In an age of social media, every interaction is amplified, every silence interpreted, every gesture uploaded into the collective marketplace of attention. To step back from performance now is more radical than ever, for we live in a time where distraction has become a global economy. The man who awakens feels this tension deeply. He sees how people cling to roles, not only in conversation, but across digital spaces, where curated selves are offered in exchange for belonging. And so, his refusal to play is not merely personal, it is an act of quiet rebellion against the machinery of consumerism that thrives on perpetual dissatisfaction. Here the relevance of solitude deepens. It is not just a retreat from shallow talk, but from the endless cycle of needing more approval, more likes, more certainty, more comfort. The awakening man senses that freedom is not found in accumulation, but in the relinquishing of false needs. He does not withdraw out of resentment, but because the world's demands for constant performance no longer feel real. His distance is not a wound, it is a healing. For solitude, when embraced with clarity, becomes not loneliness but spaciousness, the ground upon which truth can stand. As he moves deeper into this path, solitude begins to change its flavor. What once felt like emptiness now becomes a kind of fullness, a steadying presence that does not require external confirmation. He no longer fills his hours with distractions simply to avoid the weight of silence. Instead, silence itself becomes a teacher. In it, he discovers that much of what the world calls connection is in truth an elaborate avoidance of being alone. Most people are terrified of stillness, for in stillness one meets oneself without disguise, and so they cling to constant noise, constant motion, constant affirmation. The awakening man realizes this not with superiority, but with compassion, for he too once sought refuge in the same illusion. He once filled conversations with polite agreements, offered reassurances he did not believe, and mirrored emotions he did not feel, all in the name of belonging. But now, with the veil lifted, those gestures appear hollow. He no longer wishes to maintain ties that demand performance, nor relationships that require him to shrink himself for the sake of keeping others comfortable. From this honesty, distance naturally grows. Some interpret it as arrogance, others as disinterest, but in truth it is neither. He is not rejecting others, he is simply refusing to reject himself. This quiet refusal disrupts the invisible contracts upon which many social interactions rest. I will validate you if you validate me. I will flatter you if you flatter me. I will agree with your illusions if you agree with mine. When he no longer upholds these contracts, conversations begin to falter. Friends grow uneasy, bonds begin to fade, and the fabric of familiar connection unravels, not through conflict, but through the silent absence of pretense. In this space, he begins to see that what most call friendship is often a pact of avoidance. People cling together, not because they share truth, but because they share distraction. They laugh together at complaints about their jobs, debate over ideas they have never deeply questioned, or reinforce one another's carefully constructed stories. Once he no longer participates in these rituals, the bonds weaken naturally. What remains is rare and precious. Connections not based on illusion, but on recognition, two souls, standing without masks, not seeking to complete one another, but choosing to walk side by side. This is where solitude reveals its paradox. On the surface, it looks like separation, but in truth, it is a return to authenticity. For the first time, he begins to experience what it means to be whole, without the scaffolding of external approval. He does not need to explain himself, nor to be understood. He does not need to prove his worth by the amount of space he occupies in another's life. And so his life becomes quieter, not from loss, but from clarity. He discovers that much of what once filled his time was nothing more than a search for recognition, a search that can never be satisfied, for recognition from others is always fleeting. Yet this awakening does not unfold in isolation from the world's broader currents. The man cannot help but notice how society itself mirrors the very patterns he has stepped away from. In an age of consumerism, nations measure success by growth without end, just as individuals measure worth by approval without end. The endless pursuit of more products, more followers, more attention, mirrors the endless conversations he once took part in to avoid silence. And just as he has discovered the futility of such seeking within himself, he begins to see its futility in the world. He notices how the fragmentation of relationships on a personal level echoes the fragmentation of communities and even nations. Trust breaks down not because people are inherently unkind, but because so much of connection is built on illusion. The illusion of endless progress, the illusion of perpetual comfort, the illusion that one's value must always be affirmed by something external. And when those illusions falter, society too feels the unease, just as his friends felt unease when he stopped performing. In this way, his solitude becomes more than personal. It becomes a mirror of a larger awakening yet to come. He understands that the same clarity that allows him to step back from shallow ties also calls humanity to step back from destructive illusions. The illusions of limitless consumption in a finite world, of identity purchased through brands, of belonging manufactured through constant distraction. His awakening whispers of another way, not just for him, but for all who are willing to face the stillness they fear. With time, the silence no longer feels foreign. It is not an absence, but a presence, not a void, but a ground. He learns to rest in it, to see clearly without the distortions of constant social mirrors. And in that resting, a deeper freedom arises, the freedom of not having to be anyone for anyone. He does not need to manage impressions, nor sculpt himself into an image palatable to the world. He does not seek to stand out nor to blend in. He simply is. Others interpret this differently. They project onto his stillness whatever they cannot reconcile in themselves. To some he seems mysterious, to others arrogant, to still others wounded. But he is none of those things. He has merely stopped offering the signals upon which others depend, the constant reassurance, the constant echo of their own narratives. And in the absence of those signals, they become uncomfortable. They cannot read him because he is no longer playing a role that exists within their framework. Yet his neutrality is not coldness, it is honesty. He does not flatter where he does not feel admiration. He does not argue when he sees futility. He does not soothe when the soothing would only maintain an illusion. In refusing these small performances, he offers something rarer, the possibility of genuine contact, if others dare to meet him without masks. But few do. For most, the collapse of the familiar script is too unsettling. So, many drift away. He notices that relationships often depend on mutual illusions, subtle bargains that go unspoken. I'll avoid your truths if you avoid mine. I'll protect your illusions if you protect mine. And when he no longer enters into those bargains, the structure dissolves on its own. This dissolution is not an act of rejection, but of liberation. He begins to sense that true friendship, the kind unbound by illusions, is exceedingly rare. It cannot be demanded, cannot be manufactured. It emerges naturally, and only when both people have stopped needing to be completed by the other. Such friendships are quiet, simple, stripped of performance. They require nothing except presence. In his solitude, the man sees a reflection of humanity's wider struggle. Just as individuals cling to illusions for comfort, entire societies cling to narratives that maintain order while hiding truth. We consume endlessly to avoid facing our emptiness. We build identities around possessions, careers, affiliations, fragile structures that collapse the moment silence enters. We fragment into groups, not because we are truly different at the core, but because clinging to roles and ideologies gives us a sense of stability. The man's awakening is a microcosm of this larger awakening yet to come. His solitude reflects the solitude of a species standing on the brink, surrounded by noise yet starving for meaning. Climate change, economic unrest, the disintegration of traditional communities, these are not random crises, but expressions of the same avoidance he sees in everyday conversation. Humanity fills its days with production and consumption, just as individuals fill silence with chatter. Both are attempts to flee the stillness, to avoid the discomfort of seeing clearly. The warming planet mirrors our own restlessness, our inability to stop consuming even when we know the cost. The polarization of societies mirrors the way individuals fracture relationships rather than face uncomfortable truths. And yet, just as his solitude revealed peace beneath the noise, perhaps humanity too must learn to embrace a collective silence, a pause in which we see ourselves without illusions. Perhaps freedom, whether personal or global, begins not with the next purchase, the next distraction, or the next performance, but with the courage to stop pretending, to stop running, to stop chasing illusions. In that pause, clarity emerges. For the man, this clarity is not always comfortable. It costs him many connections, many familiar roles, many old identities, but he would not return. For the truth, however disruptive, is more nourishing than the comfort of lies. And in that truth, he finds that solitude is not exile, but belonging not to a group, not to a role, but to life itself. As the man continues in this new rhythm, his life becomes quieter, but not barren. The quiet is fertile. In it, he finds a strength that is not dependent on applause or recognition. He no longer measures his worth by how much space he occupies in the minds of others. He no longer feels the need to explain himself to those who cannot see. The paradox is clear. The less he seeks validation, the more solid he becomes. The less he chases connection, the more real connections may emerge, rare, subtle, but deeply alive. From the outside, this stillness is often misinterpreted. Friends may say he has withdrawn, that he has become cold, or that he is too distant. Yet if they could see from within, they would notice something else. Not withdrawal, but presence. Not arrogance, but honesty. Not disinterest, but freedom. For the first time, he can sit with himself without craving distraction. For the first time, he does not need to be filled by others, nor shielded from his own silence. In solitude, he begins to encounter what most of the world avoids. The recognition that much of what fills human life is noise masquerading as necessity. Endless tasks, endless talk, endless consumption, all disguises for an unease we have never faced. He sees that loneliness, as most define it, is not truly about the absence of others, but about the absence of connection to oneself. When he sits in silence, what others call loneliness reveals itself as peace. This recognition ripples outward. He sees the same patterns shaping the global stage. Humanity builds entire economies around avoidance. The consumerist machine thrives on perpetual dissatisfaction, ensuring we always seek what we do not have, never pausing to notice that what we seek is not out there. The climate crisis is not just about carbon or resources. It is about a deeper inability to live simply, to sit still, to dwell in enough. Political fragmentation is not just ideology, but the magnified projection of personal fragmentation, each group defending illusions they dare not examine. The man's solitude is therefore not merely personal, but emblematic of a larger path. Just as he had to step back from shallow performances, perhaps humanity too must step back from the endless performances of progress and consumption. Just as he discovered that silence was not emptiness but peace, perhaps we too must learn that stillness is not regression but renewal. To stop chasing illusions, even briefly, is to glimpse freedom. Freedom not as license to do whatever one wants, but freedom as release from the compulsions that bind us. Alan Watts once suggested that the true liberation lies in realizing that the game of seeking is endless, and therefore stepping outside of it. The man begins to live this truth. He no longer plays for approval, no longer consumes for identity, no longer argues to secure belief. He does not need to be seen as right, nor as good, nor as special. He has faced the silence, and found that beneath it was not void, but wholeness. This shift is not the end, but the beginning of another way of being, one that flows through solitude into a deeper connection with life itself. He realizes that true freedom is not gained by escaping the world, but by no longer being enslaved by its illusions. And so he walks quietly, not as an exile, but as one who has made peace with the cost of truth. There comes a point when solitude ceases to feel unusual. It becomes the natural ground of life, not something to defend, not something to explain. He no longer interprets distance as a wound or a problem to be solved, but as a natural consequence of refusing to live in pretense. While others surround themselves with noise to prove they are alive, he has discovered a deeper aliveness in silence. While many chase attention, he has learned to walk unseen, unmeasured, unburdened. People still wonder, doesn't he feel lonely? Doesn't he wish for more company? But they confuse absence with emptiness. He is not absent. He is present in a way that performance never allowed. He has not become indifferent to others, but he no longer trades truth for belonging. The closeness that illusions demand has been replaced by the spaciousness that honesty creates. And this spaciousness, though it looks like separation, carries a depth of connection to life itself that superficial ties could never offer. In this final turning, he realizes he no longer needs the world to awaken for him to feel whole. He does not need agreement to confirm his clarity. He does not need validation to know who he is. He has learned that freedom is not about the absence of bonds, but the absence of illusion within them. When he does meet another who has also tasted this clarity, the connection requires no negotiation, no performance, no demand. It simply is. Such meetings are rare, but their rarity does not diminish him, for he is no longer seeking completion outside himself. And here, the man's personal awakening echoes a truth that humankind must one day face. Just as he discovered that constant chatter was no substitute for stillness, humanity must discover that endless consumption is no substitute for meaning. Just as he stepped back from the game of validation, humanity must step back from the game of endless growth on a finite planet. For the same illusion that fractures our personal relationships fractures our global one. The belief that we must always be more successful, more admired, more powerful, more secure. But this chase, whether personal or planetary, only deepens the fragmentation. Climate collapse, political unrest, fractured communities, these are not separate from the inner restlessness that drives us. They are magnified expressions of the same disquiet that keeps individuals from facing themselves in silence. The man sees that his awakening is not isolated but connected, a microcosm of the very transformation the world resists. And while he cannot force others to awaken, he can live as a quiet reminder that peace is not found in noise, that freedom is not purchased, that truth requires no validation. So he walks alone, but not as an outsider. He walks as one who has accepted the cost of truth, one who has surrendered the comfort of illusions for the strength of clarity. Solitude is no longer a burden, but a home. He has awakened, and once awakened, he cannot return to sleep. And though the world may still dream, chasing status, filling silences, consuming endlessly, he knows that authenticity though rare, is more precious than acceptance. He carries this as his quiet offering, not to convert, not to persuade, but simply to live. For in living truthfully, he embodies the freedom that others, deep down, are also seeking. And whether they are ready or not, the presence of such freedom plants a seed. He walks alone, yes, but in truth he walks with everything.